Evolution is nothing more than a work of imagination without concrete proof to support it. There is lack of concrete evidence to support the theory of evolution. The fossil record is incomplete and does not provide a clear picture of how species have evolved over time. Without physical evidence of transitional forms, the theory of evolution is merely speculative and cannot be considered a proven fact. The complexity of living organisms is evident that they could not have evolved through natural selection alone. The intricate design of organisms, such as human eye or the wings of insects, or the intermeshing bows, could not have arisen through a series of random mutations and natural selection. There is lack of observable instances of one species evolving into another, while scientists have observed small-scale evolutionary changes within populations such as the development of antibiotic resistance in bacteria. But these changes do not provide evidence for the larger process of species evolution. Without direct observation of one species evolving into another, the theory of evolution remains speculative and unproven. The mechanisms of natural selection and genetic mutations as driving forces for species evolution are not clear. Rate of mutation is too slow to account for the diversity of life on Earth, and that natural selection alone cannot explain the complexity of living organisms. Theory of evolution relies on unrealistic assumptions about the mechanisms of adaptation, so alternative explanations should be considered. The theory of evolution does not fully explain the complexity of genetic information encoded in DNA, which is too finely tuned to have arisen solely from random mutations. Therefore, an intelligent designer must have played a role in shaping the genetic code of living organisms. The principle of common descent, which states that all living organisms share a common ancestor, is dubious. The evidence for common descent is circumstantial, and that alternative explanation should be considered. The gaps in the fossil record as evidence that the theory is incomplete and unproven. There are missing links between different species that cannot be explained by the theory of evolution. Without a complete fossil record, the evidence for evolution is insufficient to support the theory as a valid scientific explanation for the diversity of life on Earth. The validity of the methods used to date fossils and determine the age of the Earth is questionable. Ra- Radiometric dating techniques are unreliable and that the assumptions underlying these methods are flawed. Without accurate dating methods, the evidence for evolution becomes less convincing and the alternative explanations for the diversity of life should be considered. Theory of evolution cannot explain the origin of life itself. While evolution vaguely explains how species change over time, it doesn't provide a mechanism for how life first was on Earth. The complexity of life is evidence of a creator, and that the theory of evolution fails to address the fundamental question of how life began. Theory of evolution fails to take into account the role of intelligence and purpose in the development of living organisms. Evolutionists often argue that natural selection is a blind, purposeless process that drives the development of species over time. However, incredible in complexity and diversity of life on Earth point to a higher intelligence at play, guiding the development of living organisms in ways that cannot be explained by natural selection alone. Evolution is construct and imagination. Ignoring fundamental aspects of biology and the natural world, evolution is nothing more than a work of imagination, without concrete proof to support it. The theory of evolution is a for pseudoscience as it lacks empirical evidence and relies heavily on unproven assumptions, fails to explain the origin of complex biological structures, and is not testable or falsifiable. Scientific method relies on empirical evidence, which means it is based on observable and measurable data that can be tested and verified. Do theory of evolution qualify as scientific?